Live from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, we welcome you to a special Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew. Kaylee, it's day one of the Republican National Convention here in Milwaukee as we anticipate news on a running mate, but also find breaking news today on Donald Trump's legal journey yet again.
Yeah, one of the 4 criminal cases against Donald Trump completely dismissed. It's the documents case down in Florida in which a Trump-appointed judge, Eileen Cannon, has dismissed the case on the grounds that the special counsel who brought the case against the former president, Jack Smith, was appointed unconstitutionally. Now, of course, the Justice Department could potentially appeal that. But what news to get on the first day
Incredible timing.
of the Republican convention, especially given just days before the news flow over the weekend and the attempted assassination of the man who's about to become the official Republican nominee.
It's just one headline after another, Kaylee, and in this case, another win for Donald Trump on the legal front. His sentencing in the New York case having been delayed, of course, until September. His immunity claim before the Supreme Court. And now this. Jack Smith may be out of business.
Yeah, we'll have to see his recourse moving forward. But of course, what we're waiting to see first from Donald Trump is that announcement of his vice president as the RNC gets underway from here in Milwaukee. And with the latest, let's bring in Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. Tyler, it has been a long time coming to this moment, and now it's here.
Right, Kaylee. Well, the Republican National Convention has largely kicked off as planned here in Milwaukee, and there's a real sense of energy as you walk around the city, as we're expecting nearly 50,000 participants to flock here over the next 4 days. As I mentioned, it's proceeding largely as planned. We're expecting the party to vote on their platform and then also formally nominate former President Trump as the party's nominee. But as this all gets underway, there is this heightened scrutiny on the security in the wake of the assassination attempt over the weekend against the former president. Now, President Biden used this moment, the eve ahead of the Republican National Convention to address the nation from the Oval Office, urging Americans against political violence. Take a listen to what he had to say.
A former president, an American citizen killed while simply exercising his freedom to support the candidate of his choosing. We cannot, we must not go down this road in America. We've traveled it before throughout our history. Violence has never been the answer.
Now, the Secret Service says they are largely keeping plans in place that they've been working on for nearly 18 months to keep this convention safe. They did add that they are adding law enforcement personnel around the city. We learned that the Secret Service is working with nearly 40 different law enforcement agencies from all around the country to help keep this convention safe. And as it gets underway and more people come here and there's more intrigue, as you mentioned, one of the things we are watching closely for is who former President Trump is going to announce for his vice presidential nominee. Some of the names going around include Senator J.D. Vance and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. So we'll have to see where that shakes out. He does say that he will announce that pick today. And we know as we get this schedule for later in the week, that VP pick will address the nation in prime time on Wednesday before former President Trump takes the stage Thursday night.
Tyler, thank you. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall with us in Milwaukee on this first day of the RNC. We thank you, Tyler, and we're going to have much more coverage, of course, of the convention as it gets started today with, as Tyler mentioned, the roll call vote, speeches later tonight, and maybe news certainly on a running mate. As soon as we find out a name, we will bring it to you. As we turn now to Bloomberg's Jeanne Grasso for our other breaking story that we've been following here today, and that is news about Donald Trump's legal journey with a judge dismissing the criminal case against Donald Trump for mishandling classified information. This brings us to Florida. And Jeanne, another surprise here. I think we can call this another win for Donald Trump. What does it mean for the other case that Jack Smith is trying to helm when it comes to January 6th?
Well, it doesn't really mean anything for the other case because that's a D.C. federal court, and this is a federal judge in Florida. So the D.C. case will go forward. And in point of fact, Judge Cannon stands alone because from the Watergate era, we've had special counsels. And, for example, Robert Mueller's appointment as special counsel was challenged in D.C., and a D.C. federal judge appointed by Donald Trump threw out that challenge. David Weiss, who is prosecuting Hunter Biden as special counsel, his appointment was challenged on the same grounds, and that too was thrown out by a Delaware judge. So she stands on not solid ground, and I think she was moved to do this and encouraged even more by Clarence Thomas's concurrence, solo concurrence in the presidential immunity case. So this is likely going to go out on appeal and will probably be reversed.
Well, June, just knowing the timeline with which we're working and an election coming up in less than 4 months, how long exactly is that process likely to take?
I think, we've always known that this case was being slow-walked by the judge and unlikely to be heard before the election. And now that we have this new additional element of going to the 11th Circuit, having briefing, they'll probably schedule oral arguments. I mean, it's just makes it completely unlikely that this case, even if the 11th Circuit decides to, what we expect, they say that Judge Cannon was wrong and perhaps even takes her off the case, still, it would take too long for another judge to get up to date and to have all the motions that need to be heard in this case yet, which Judge Cannon has been slow walking. So I think there's no chance that this will go before the election.
All right, Bloomberg's June Grasso, host of Bloomberg Law, thank you so much. Now, joining us live on set here in Milwaukee is a member of the House Judiciary Committee to help us react to this news and get things underway here in Wisconsin as the convention kicks off. Republican Congresswoman Victoria Spartz of Indiana is with us now. Welcome to Bloomberg TV and Radio, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for being here. We have a lot to discuss in terms of the convention taking place over the next 4 days, but could we first get your reaction to the dismissal of Donald Trump's case down in Florida?
Well, at least we have some common sense judges, because unfortunately our judicial system been weaponized, and it's really an American people see it. So I think this is very, fortunate that we now can at least have real conversation, and what they're doing to President Trump is unbelievable. We, as a member of Judiciary Committee, we have so many investigation looking on these issues and how what Department of Justice is doing. This is really dangerous what's happening in our country. This is not in the democratic constitutional republic that should be happening. That's happening in third world countries, but not in America. So I'm glad to see that happening, and I think it's a good step forward.
Do you not believe the independent counsel is independent?
Well, listen, we had these independent counsels, but we've seen that what is happening, including with all of this report, they still come from the same system. And honestly, in a lot of ways, even special counsels the Department of Justice appoints, they still, I would argue, probably in some way unconstitutional and probably not as independent, because they still come from the same system, and the system became corrupt, I hate to tell you, and really not serving to protect people's rights and using very, very effectively politically.
So would this discredit, say, Special Counsel Weiss, who brought the charges against Hunter Biden, or Special Counsel Hur, who authored that report about Joe Biden's own handling of classified documents and called him a well-meaning man with a poor memory?
Well, listen, I would say that we need to really have a serious conversation about usage of special counsel. In last judiciary hearing, we actual Republicans brought up, some of my colleagues too, including me, the issue, how constitutional the special counsels are, and really should be we using them, because I've noticed what's happening. We have all this investigation going, so no one can ask questions. There is no transparency. Then statute of limitation expires, so no one is bringing charges, and there is no really consequences for doing some things that are pretty serious. So I think this has been very ineffective process. Congress needs to look how we can clarify that law and how the usage of special counsel. So I have really concerns with all of them, I'll be honest with you, and the results of the investigations and really lack of accountability in the Department of Justice.
It's interesting to hear that you see that it cuts both ways politically. We're here on the first day of the Republican National Convention. You must be excited. You finally got to this moment, and it hasn't come easily here based on what we've seen over the past couple of days. Donald Trump has made his way to town, and I'd like to get your impressions on what we're hearing, this narrative about unity, about lowering the temperature following an attempted assassination of a former president of the United States. Is the Republican Party capable of lowering the temperature this week?
Well, listen, I mean, it's an election year, so people definitely, have a lot of excitement. But I think, it's going to be excitement for the future of our country, because we need to start governing. We have a lot of serious issues been punted for a very long time, and American people are tired. That's why the temperature is so hot on all of the sides, because the government haven't been governing and representing the people. And I think this is going to be a discussion how we can get our economy back on growth, how we can, build good economy for all Americans, deal with inflation, and deal with a lot of policy to have a brighter future for our children, because we're not doing it right now. And political rhetoric is difficult, and I think, unfortunately, it's been used in all of the sides to energize the base, and it's part of politics. But I hope we can have a constructive conversation. We do definitely need to investigate, see what's happened, because this is unbelievable what's happened really, and how close, we had to a situation that could have been very different convention right now, and it would be sad thing for our country and could destabilize country so much. So I hope we'll have more adults in the room to have this serious debates on issues. That's what we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as we consider the events of this weekend and what is being done in response, there has been reporting that the chair of the Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan, as well as Jerry Nadler, the ranking member, were briefed by the FBI this morning. Has any of that information been shared with you as a member? What have you been told?
Well, we had some discussion, and we have, right now we need to make sure that we proceed properly. But I think it's in the interest of both parties, both sides, to look what's really happened. So I hope that my Democrat colleagues, and we had situation where, Jim Jordan and Nadler on situations of surveillance and warrant requirement, we actually came together, people on the right and the left. We had situation, we're dealing with some protection of privacy of Americans issues, so we can come together if we want. So maybe we can have a serious conversation, not to have a lot of grandstanding, even in Judiciary Committee. And this is probably the most grandstanding committee, but we can find a common ground, so I'm glad to see that. And I hope we can have a serious conversation, because it can cut both ways, not just in our way. I think Democrats should be concerned about that too, because that is a huge failure of security what just happened.
Well, should that conversation include security for members of Congress? We've been through this before, following Gabby Giffords, following Steve Scalise. Should members like yourself have a security detail?
We need to have a discussion. It is a pretty dangerous job, and how we really, deal. A lot of people don't realize that generally only a few members in Congress have any security, and we right now in a very polarized environments, and how we can deal with that. I think this is we need to have, because it's a great one, a huge responsibility. But in this environment, I'm probably one of the few members of Congress that does in-person town halls. A lot of my colleagues are actually very concerned to do that for that reason, because you put your life in danger by doing that, but we still have to be able to communicate with our constituents, and we have to be able to get out, otherwise we cannot represent them well. So I think it's a conversation to have.
Well, as you're doing that communication and thinking about what your constituents want to see from the Republican Party, the kind of policy conversations that will be happening at the RNC this week, you talk about things like fighting inflation. What is the actual plan to do so, when many economists we speak with here at Bloomberg suggest that some of the Trump policies he is suggesting, like increasing tariffs, would only be further inflationary? So what exactly is the proper plan?
Well, I think, President Trump is, he wants to grow the economy, and he wants to make sure that we continue tax cuts. But we definitely need to look in the spending side. And this is a conversation I have with his team members on spending side, how we can reform some of the big ticket items like healthcare. If we want to really re-energize the economy, decrease debt load, and save a lot of programs that we promised to Americans, including like Medicare and Medicaid. Let's look how much there is abuse in the system. Trillions of dollars of issues that actually President Trump and Obama agreed on. Let's have, and that's what the conversation we need to have, and have a plan. And I think this is something we've been working to try to have, because a lot of time in the political world, you have very short window where things can happen right after the election. So you need to have a plan, and good plan you need to wait and have a real. So that's what we want to do, how we can deal with our dependency on China, our supply chain, energy policy, our spending, which big part is healthcare, and dependency on China. And really is with driving the biggest driver on inflation right now is that we have to deal. And I think he has a lot of good people with good policy ideas. And I think before, my hopes we're going to win, and my hopes we can deliver that next Congress with President Trump.
You're the only Ukrainian American serving in Congress. Will we hear about Ukraine at this convention? What will be the party's posture on this war?
Well, I think this is a very complicated issue. I think, this convention is going to talk about big issues like border, domestic issues, but foreign policy issues are important, and President Trump doesn't want to have wars. President Trump wants Europeans to step up, and he probably doesn't get enough credit in a lot of international issues that he actually did a lot of things to deter Russia from further aggression. So I don't think that is not the main topic on the, in the mind of Americans right now, but it is a very important topic, and we have to figuring it out. We cannot have never-ending wars. We need to learn from $2 trillion, that we spend in Afghanistan.
You believe he can end the war on day one, like he says?
Listen, this is a lot of political things, that you say, but he will definitely will do whatever he can to really try to figure out how to resolve this situation, because this has become a very, very, very difficult and very, very bloody war, and millions of lives are going to be destroyed already.
So do you think that Ukraine can count on a future Trump administration to continue the support the U.S. has provided up to this point in the war?
From my perspective, I think Biden administration failed in Ukraine, deterred the war, the slow walk they ate. So I think President Trump will be much stronger on these issues, and I think he'll be willing to work with all of the parts. I cannot talk on his behalf, but I'll know that, a lot of things people don't realize is also Congress is involved in these issues. Actually, power of the person and war power should be in Congress anyway. And I think President Trump been working and talking to a lot of members of Congress on this issue too. So there is a political rhetorics, and there is also real, discussions. And I think these real discussions will be much better for Ukraine than they are right now.
Are we going to get a running mate announcement today?
I hope so, and I'm very excited about that.
Where are you in the office pool?
So listen, they're all lucky that I cannot be one. Otherwise, they will be all in trouble, But I will be a great ally to the administration, because I truly believe we cannot govern through executive orders. Congress needs to start doing its job. Actually, Chevron doctrine, the Supreme Court ruling Chevron doctrine showed us we are not doing our job. And I think we need to. This is instability for the country to change policies with each administration. We need to discuss, deliberate, and deliver on some of the key policies, and they have long-term effect for economy, for businesses, and predictability. That is very important, that our businesses, even sometimes maybe they don't like our policies, but at least they can react on them, not like retroactively do them or change them 3 times a year. That's not very good for the country.
Understood. Republican Congresswoman Victoria Spartz of Indiana, thank you for being with us. I wish you a safe and successful convention.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us today in Milwaukee.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, and thank you for joining us in our special coverage from Milwaukee, the Republican National Convention in day one. And Kaylee, we're all waiting for that announcement on a running mate.
Yeah, will it be J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Doug Burgum? We all just have to wait and watch. And of course, here on Bloomberg TV and radio, we'll also be waiting and watching to hear from the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, who's sitting down with David Rubenstein this hour. As we were just speaking with the congresswoman about the Republican platform and the idea of fighting inflation, we do know that a lot of that power resides not just with fiscal policy, but with monetary policy.
This is an important economic club interview with our own David Rubenstein and the chairman of the Federal Reserve. That'll be coming up a little bit later on this hour. We also have our signature panel with us, Rick Davis and Jeanne, Zaino, and much more ahead on the news here about Donald Trump's classified documents case being dismissed. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew on the fastest show in politics. This is Bloomberg.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, live from the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. We have much to look forward to this afternoon, including the vice presidential selection of Donald Trump. But we also are waiting to hear from Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, sitting down with David Rubenstein, the Economic Club of Washington, this hour. And let's just take a quick check at how markets are positioned as we head into that, knowing that this is the first day of trading in the aftermath of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. We're looking out for the so-called Trump trade here. And what we find is that stocks are broadly higher across the board. The S&P 500 right now up by about 0.5%. We're at another all-time high of 5,643. The NASDAQ 100 as well up by about 0.4%. Interestingly, you're actually seeing the Dow outperforming today, up by nearly 300 points. In the bond market, we're up by about 3 basis points on the 10-year yield. That sensitive 2-year yield to Fed policy, as everyone waits to hear from the chairman, is down by a single basis point. We're at 444 right now on the 2-year. And if you take a look at some specific stocks that may be sensitive to Donald Trump, what you're finding in the market today is really interesting. Of course, there is a very Trump-oriented stock, and that is Trump Media and Technology Group. The ticker there, of course, DJT, up by 33% in today's session, as the market is now seeing perhaps greater odds of Donald Trump's victory in November. Certainly predicted bet markets are seeing that outcome is likely greater. And as a result, some things that see maybe potentially policy benefit under Donald Trump, like cryptocurrencies, given he has positioned himself to be a more crypto-friendly president, are going higher. Bitcoin actually up by about 5% on the day. We're back up to $63,000. But of course, while there are some up trades, there's down ones too. The thought being that Democrats may be more positive for sectors like solar technology, for example. So if you look at TAN, the ETF that tracks a basket of solar stocks from Invesco, that is actually lower on the day, down by about 5.7% on the day, so lower over the course of the last 2 days, net by about 3%. So interesting to take stocks of how the market is reacting to the events of the last 24 hours and how they'll react for the days to come at the convention this week, Joe.
Kaylee, let's bring in our political panel as we gear up for the start of this convention today. Rick Davis, Stonecourt Capital, and Jeanne Zaino, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, are with us. We finally made it, guys. And as we mentioned earlier, it wasn't that easy considering the news just of the past 48 hours here. And we add another headline today, Rick Davis, and what I think we can clearly call another win for Donald Trump in seeing this classified documents case dismissed. It's almost like someone wrote this.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a
bizarre story to lead up to this moment.
The movement for Donald Trump since his really disastrous legal decision in New York with, being convicted of 34 felony counts. But ever since then, it's been golden. Disastrous performance by the president, at the debate, and subsequent things that have happened to him, including, attempted suicide. I mean, he's bounced back from just about everything thrown at him. And now, again, another win, as you say, Joe, in the legal system. And this will reverberate throughout the convention today. We have 50,000 people all jammed into to Milwaukee this week, and they're all focused on what's going on with Trump. And the media is just giving him one more narrative, one more news story, one more positive impact to his campaign after the other. And maybe even tonight we'll see him come to the hall and take credit for it all.
Well,
we already have heard from him today in the aftermath of not just the assassination attempt from over the weekend, but of course this ruling from Aileen Cannon in Florida. Jeanne, he posted on True Social, as we move forward in uniting our nation after the horrific events on Saturday, the dismissal of this lawless indictment in Florida should be just a first step, followed quickly by dismissal of all the witch hunts. So for all of the talk about potentially seeing a different Donald Trump this week, someone who's focused much more on unity than, say, retribution, we're still getting the witch hunt language.
We are. And I think one of the major themes, particularly prior to the attempted assassination, was going to be the weaponization of the Justice Department. And as you looked at his social media, and as I have, he is trying to tie that in, this decision, as the beginning of the end of the weaponization. He is hoping that the other cases are dismissed. We'll have to wait and see. But this was surely a gift from this judge down in Florida. Somebody said they would like to walk into a lottery station, wherever you buy lottery tickets around here, with him, because this is a very lucky guy at this point. Obviously lucky that he's healthy today, but also lucky these charges are dismissed. And of course, we expect there'll be appeals, but this will continue long after the election. So they have successfully put that off. And he is trying to tie it to this argument of unity. Once we put this weaponization behind us, we can unify the country. And I have noticed an uptick in his talk about unity, so I expect we're going to hear a lot more of that this week from him.
A vice presidential announcement, a running mate announcement, will only increase interest at this moment, Rick, and we hear that will come likely this afternoon. We've actually got some business to be had, though, as we remind our viewers and listeners, you run a convention. The roll call today is what this is actually all about.
Yeah, this is sort of the pro forma. We used to actually spend a lot of time doing this on television when people would come in on Monday morning and they'd see the delegates all assembled and the great state of Alabama, the boll weevil state, and you'd hear all these crazy things.
Yes.
Now nobody cares about that. But that is
still
what's going to happen
though,
today. And so, they'll do the roll call. They'll put Donald Trump's name in the nomination. The delegations all assembled will have fun with that. It's pro forma, it's part of the convention. But people really need to understand, this is the most authoritative body of the party. It decides where the party is going to go in the future, who their candidates are going to be, what the platform is going to look like. They decided on a platform last week. This afternoon, they'll start talking about that platform once they constitute themselves. But this is the penultimate body within the party that makes all those decisions.
Well, and of course, they'll decide to make Donald Trump the leader of the ticket. There's the question about who's joining him on that ticket that we still have as of 12:30 Eastern time on the start of this convention. We don't know who that vice president is going to be. As we get closer to the actual announcement, Rick, What are you thinking?
You know, it's kind of like Apprentice. You got to have a commercial break right before you find out who gets fired. In this case, who gets hired. And look, I think there's been actually kind of an interesting swing within the campaign. I mean, they've been going out talking to everybody about like changing the mood of the campaign, changing the focus of the message. They don't want anybody talking about the campaign messaging until after this move. And so the question is, maybe he was headed to a J.D. Vance, who's kind of the pit bull of the Republican Party and was even out with some pretty harsh criticisms just hours after the attempted assassination on the Biden administration. Or maybe there's a chance for a more sort of, I would say, moderate voice, not ideologically, but euphemistically. And so people like Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, have been talked about all along, but didn't feel like he was enough of a attack dog, and now it may be we don't want that attack dog. Maybe we want someone who can talk to suburban women.
How about that? So the potential for surprise, it's Donald Trump, always there, even though we keep hearing about short lists. You know what we're not talking about? An interview with Lester Holt on NBC later, which in any other world, if it weren't for what happened over the weekend, might have been one of our top stories today with questions about Joe Biden's acuity, his age. He's going to do this again, apparently. I don't know who's watching this on a night when our eyes will be on likely a running mate announcement at the convention. But you've got quite a split screen here. How does he handle it?
We do. I mean, this is the Democrats, Joe Biden's campaign, trying to counter program. They are going to go ahead. They've moved it from Texas up to the White House. So he is going to go on. I understand NBC has promised to air it in its entirety without editing. If that is the case, I think that would be welcome. But to your point, we're not going to, see people engaging in it with the huge audience we might have.
Is it a waste of an opportunity then?
I don't think so. My view is Biden needs to be out there talking repeatedly. It needs to stop being a sort of moment when the president talks. It needs to be more common than it has been. And I don't think Madison had The Apprentice in mind. Donald Trump, now Rick Davis, everybody talking The Apprentice. Is this what he had in mind when he talked about the VP?
You're hired.
Donald Trump did compare this to, I think, a highly sophisticated version of The Apprentice.
Tell me there's not going to be a boardroom set on the stage. You know we're going to see that later.
Oh, gosh, no.
Of course, we'll be here with you, whatever we see, to describe it for you, as will Rick Davis of Stonecourt Capital and Jeanne Zaino of Iona University. Our wonderful political panel will be sticking with us throughout the next few hours. But we also want to touch on the breaking news that we woke up to today, the documents case that Donald Trump has been charged in Florida, now dismissed by Judge Aileen Cannon on grounds that Jack Smith, the special counsel who brought the case, was appointed unconstitutionally. So let's get some reaction from Florida now. Dave Aronberg is joining us. He is Palm Beach County State Attorney. Dave, we've spoken with you about this case at length for more than a year since it was first brought against Donald Trump and he was arraigned down in Miami last June. And then, poof, there it goes. What do you expect to happen from here?
Jack Smith is going to appeal this, Kaylee. He's going to take it to the 11th Circuit, maybe up to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court may then weigh in on this. I think a reason why Judge Cannon decided to go ahead and do this was because she got a green light from Justice Clarence Thomas, who wrote a concurring opinion in the immunity decision that set a roadmap for her to do this. Now, notably, no other justice signed on to his opinion. Maybe it was because he wasn't asked to give his thoughts on this issue, or maybe because they disagree with him. But this is the first time that a judge has thrown out the special counsel statute as unconstitutional when years have gone by with judges repeatedly acknowledging that it is constitutional. So this is Judge Cannon doing Judge Cannon things, and she will be appealed. And I do expect Jack Smith also to ask the 11th Circuit to remove her from the case. But ultimately, I do think this is headed to the Supreme Court. And the fact that Justice Thomas gave that opinion gives her some cover.
Fascinating. In this case, then, if this appointment was unconstitutional, Dave, what does it mean for Jack Smith's other case surrounding January 6th?
This argument that the special counsel is unconstitutional is so outlandish that Donald Trump did not raise it in the D.C. election interference case. He did not even raise it in the Mar-a-Lago documents case. This was raised by outside conservative groups who then were allowed by Judge Cannon not only to submit briefs, but also to give oral arguments. I'd never even heard of that before. So where does this go? It's going to be up to the Supreme Court, I think, to determine whether the statute is constitutional. I expect it is, but it will not affect the D.C. case yet until the Supreme Court weighs in. I mean, shouldn't it affect Hunter Biden? I mean, Hunter Biden is being prosecuted by a special counsel. David Weiss, who was kept on. Now, he originally was a U.S. attorney who was confirmed by the U.S. Senate, but not for this role as special counsel. So perhaps that puts his convictions in jeopardy too, right? I mean, be careful what you ask for. I mean, this could upturn the whole apple cart.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Dave, we were just speaking about that with a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Congresswoman Victoria Spartz was with us, and she did suggest that all special counsels should really be in question, that it does indeed cut both ways. And perhaps that would also go through for special counsel Hur, who released that report on Joe Biden and his age and memory all those months ago. As we look at specifically Donald Trump, though, knowing that it was last week that he was supposed to be sentenced in the New York hush money case in which he was actually convicted of 34 felony counts, that sentencing is now set for September. But of course, his legal team has filed to have that dismissed in its entirety. Does this ruling from Cannon set a tone as to how that is likely to go, knowing that that immunity ruling from the Supreme Court upended all of this?
Judge Merchan is not going to take any marching orders from Judge Cannon. Total separate jurisdictions, sovereignty. You have Judge Cannon, a federal judge in the Southern District of Florida. You have Judge Merchan, a state judge in New York. And Trump's already been found guilty of 34 counts, and it pertained to his actions before he was elected president. The payoff to Stormy Daniels and the cover-up occurred before, although some of the cover-up continued while he was president, but that doesn't undo it. You don't get immunity for unofficial acts. Now, there is a question as to whether the testimony of Hope Hicks, since she was a presidential aide, should have been allowed in based on the broad Supreme Court ruling. I think that even if her testimony should not have been allowed, that doesn't overturn the whole case. It would be harmless error. The jury did not make its decision in the case based on her testimony. You know how we know that, Kaylee? It's because when they asked their questions during deliberations, they wanted to hear back the testimony of Michael Cohen and David Pecker, not Hope Hicks, not Madeline Westerhout. So I think that conviction will stand.
Fascinating. As we stand by for an exclusive conversation here on Bloomberg TV and radio, David Rubenstein will be sitting down momentarily, as you can see on your screen, with Jay Powell, the Fed chair. When they begin their conversation, we'll turn things over. On this first day of the Republican National Committee, good news for Donald Trump on the legal front. Dave, when you look at this from the 30,000-foot view, if he is in fact elected, all of this goes away. What happens to Georgia?
Georgia remains, as does New York, because state prosecutions are pardon-proof, and also the attorney general doesn't get to dismiss cases in state courts. That's one of the great things, Joe, about this job of being a state attorney, is that the U.S. attorney general, the president, they're not our bosses. It's the people of our communities. So those cases will remain. Whether the case in Georgia ever goes because of all the shenanigans, all the stuff that Fonnie Willis is dealing with there, I don't know, but the convictions against Trump in New York should stay. And then what will happen? Well, Trump will sit in the Oval Office. He will surround himself with Secret Service, and he will dare Georgia to go get him. He will dare New York to come get him. So we're going to have a constitutional crisis. But that's what's going to happen. If Trump returns to the White House, he will order his attorney general to just dismiss all the federal cases and then thumb his nose at the state authorities. So that's our future if he does get elected.
Well, and if he does indeed get elected, for all the rhetoric surrounding the weaponization, not just of the justice system, but what many have suggested is many facets of the American government being weaponized against Donald Trump. Are we more likely to see it, Dave? And I recognize that no one can predict the future, be that weaponization flips back at the Democratic Party, or that actually some of the system of justice within the United States gets dismantled in some way with power stripped from, say, special counsels.
Haley, we just saw a federal judge who was appointed by Donald Trump dismiss a case against Donald Trump on a grounds that no other judge has ever done before. And the Republicans are talking about the weaponization of the criminal justice system. We saw the U.S. Supreme Court delay the D.C. election interference case against Donald Trump when they could have intervened last December and then delayed it, and then come up with a broad immunity decision that nowhere else has any court has ever said. And there's no precedent for it in the Constitution. And we're still talking about the weaponization of the system against Donald Trump, I would submit that it's Trump and his allies who have been able to successfully use the system to their own benefit. Meanwhile, state prosecutors are not beholden to anyone in the White House. So I think the weaponization argument fails.
Yeah. All right, Dave Aronberg, Palm Beach County State Attorney, thank you so much for joining us while we are here in Milwaukee. We want to go now, though, to Washington, D.C. at the Economic Club of Washington, where our very own David Rubenstein is sitting down with Fed Chair Jerome Powell.
Over the weekend, there was tragic events in Pennsylvania. Some people wondered whether that would affect the markets today. Can you give us any insight as to whether you think it's had any impact on the markets?
David, I think I'll leave the markets out of it for a second, if I can, and just say that it was really a very sad day for our country. Political violence has no place in our society, and I condemn it in the strongest terms. I know we all do. A man died at a political rally. 2 other people were critically injured. It's just a sad day. And I'll say that I'm grateful that the injuries to the former president were not more serious. I'd rather not comment on the markets. It's too...
Okay. So let's get another answer that you don't want to give.
No foreplay, huh?
So there are a few billion people in the world who are waiting to see what interest rates are going to be doing. Do you have any insights on where interest rates might be going?
So I'm going to take that as a great opportunity to talk a little bit about the economy and then talk about where that leaves us with policy. So I would just start by saying that the U.S. economy has performed really remarkably well over the last couple of years. 2023, last year, was a year in which the economy grew well above 3%. The labor market remained very strong, unemployment remained very low, and inflation came down at quite a sharp pace, particularly in the second half of the year, by a very large amount. And that forecast was almost unheard of. It was unheard of before 2023. So big upside surprise that year. This year, we had expected the economy to slow a bit gradually, the labor market to continue to gradually cool off after being overheated a couple of years ago, and inflation to continue to make progress. And something like that is basically what has happened. The economy is growing now at about 1.5% in the first half of the year. Most forecasters have about a 2% growth rate for the full year. The labor market, again, has moved into better and better balance to the point where I think you can now say it's essentially no tighter than it was in 2019 before the pandemic. Remember that the labor market of 2019 was a very strong labor market. So we're back to that place, no longer overheated. On inflation, in the first quarter, we didn't make any more progress. The second quarter, actually, we did make some more progress. We've had now 3 better readings, and if you average them, that's a pretty good pace. So turning to policy, your question, what we've said is that we didn't think it would be appropriate to begin to loosen policy until we had greater confidence that inflation was moving sustainably down to 2%. We've been waiting on that, and I would say we didn't gain any additional confidence in the first quarter, but the 3 readings in the second quarter, including the one from last week, do add somewhat to confidence. We've also said that we're a dual mandate bank. For a long time since inflation arrived, it's been appropriate to focus mainly on inflation, but now that inflation has come down and the labor market has indeed cooled off, we're going to be looking at both mandates. They're in much better balance, and that means that if we were to see an unexpected weakening in the labor market, then that might also be a reason for reaction by us.
Okay, I think I understand. So to put it in terms I can for sure understand, the markets are suggesting, the futures markets, that there's a 90% chance that the Fed will lower its discount rate in September. Do you think the markets know what they're talking about?
So today I'm not going to be sending any signals one way or the other on any particular meeting. So just to ruin the fun right at the beginning. I simply, we're going to make these decisions meeting by meeting, and we're going to make them on the basis of the data as they come in, the evolving data, the evolving outlook, and also the balance of risks now that the 2 mandates are basically close to being in balance.
All right, there are some people who say that the Fed would not like to lower interest rates in a presidential campaign period because you could be criticized for helping one party or another. Do you have any comment on whether that's an accurate view?
I do. So our undertaking at all times is that we'll make our decisions based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, balance of risks, and only on that. We don't take political considerations into account. We don't put up a political filter on our decisions. That would not, it's hard enough to make these decisions based on the appropriate factors. If you're going to add a whole different filter in an area where we're not experts, that's not going to improve the quality of our decisions. And it's also not the orders we have from Congress. Our orders from Congress are to use our tools to foster maximum employment and price stability, and to do so without political considerations. That's what we're always going to do. If you look at the modern record, that is what we do, and we don't think about election cycles or anything that's political.
Okay. So the Fed has set a target for inflation of 2%. Now, can you clarify, does that mean that the inflation rate has to be at 2% before you're ready to move, if you are ready to move, or does it have to be within sight? And what does it mean to be within sight?
So when we change interest rates, that tightens financial conditions, and that in turn affects economic outcomes, growth, labor markets, and ultimately inflation, but with lags that can be long and variable, as Milton Friedman famously said. And the implication of that is that if you wait until inflation gets all the way down to 2%, you've probably waited too long, because the tightening that you're doing, or the level of tightness that you have, is still having effects which will probably drive inflation below 2%. So we've been very clear that you wouldn't wait for inflation to get all the way down to 2%. Our test has been for the past quite some time that we wanted to have greater confidence that inflation was moving sustainably down toward our 2% target. And what increases that confidence in that is more good inflation data. And lately here, we have been getting some of that.
Okay. So when you say we, let's talk about who we is. The FOMC, for those who don't follow Washington acronyms, stands for what? What is the FOMC?
It's the Federal Open Market Committee.
Okay. And who is on that committee?
It's a little bit complicated, our structure is. We have 7 governors here in Washington, all nominated by the president and confirmed to staggered 14-year terms. And we have 12 Reserve Bank presidents at reserve banks around the country. All 19, 7 plus 12, are participants on the FOMC. In any given year, all of the 7 governors vote, and 5 of the 12 Reserve Bank presidents vote. But one of the voters is always the New York Fed.
Okay. And so when you have an FOMC meeting, how many do you have a year?
We have 8 a year.
Okay. So you have 8 a year, and when you get together for 2 days or so?
We do. We so generally starts at noon or in the morning of a Tuesday, and we go all day. We generally talk about the economy, the financial stability issues, whatever special topics there may be. And at the end of the day, each person speaks on those things, and I speak at the end of that day. Then there's a brief presentation on monetary policy, and then we go to dinner upstairs in the Martin Building, and we come back the next morning. We come in at 9 o'clock, and we talk about monetary policy until we're satisfied with the outcome on monetary policy, and that usually takes most of the morning.
Okay, so when you go into an FOMC meeting the first day, do you pretty much know where you want to come out at the end of the second day, or do you want to listen to everybody and you haven't made up your mind yet?
The way it works is that, I talk to the other 18 participants regularly, and I talk to all of them at least once in the 10 days before the meeting. And I'm thinking about this 3 or 4 weeks before the meeting. What should we want to achieve? What data do we need to see? How do we want to change our communications? All those things. And so I talk to people, listen to them, and I try to put together an answer that has broad support on the committee. And so when we go into the committee on Tuesday morning, I'm confident usually that I know where this is going to go. But things happen. We get data during the meeting. Sometimes events happen. But largely, you go in kind of knowing what the likely outcome is, and that's the design of it.
So normally, if somebody calls somebody, you call all the other board members, or FOMC members, from time to time. When you call them, do you have a trouble getting your call returned, or you get a call right back, or do they take your call right away?
These calls are scheduled generally, and they go all day long. I have, like, the Friday before the meeting, I think I have 11 half-hour calls. And it's pretty, we talk about the economy. We talk about very specific aspects of the economy, about our mandate, and then we talk about policy. So there's a lot to talk about. I take pretty careful notes, And people think, but by this point, they've read all of the preparatory materials probably twice. They've talked about it with their staffs. And so, you get a really good sense of what people's thinking is. It's a very good process.
But you don't feel you have to have unanimity when you make a decision, right?
No, I always try to listen carefully to everybody. And I find that if you do listen and understand people's points and try very hard to incorporate them into what we're doing, for most people, most of the time, that's going to be enough. People do dissent. That's completely fine. We actually have, given that we have 12 reserve banks with their own economic staff and people with different backgrounds on the board and among the reserve banks, we have a disparity of views at every meeting on every question. But people do. I mean, I think there's a you want to dissent on important things, and so people are perfectly able to dissent, and when they think that's appropriate, they do.
So a lot of people in Washington, government agencies, are very good at leaking things. You're not that good at that. Why doesn't the Fed leak more? Why don't you kind of leak a lot more about what you're going to do? You just don't leak that much.
I'm kind of proud of that, actually. We do take our obligations to confidentiality very, very seriously, and because we know, how consequential it would be for someone at the Fed to be leaking. We just our whole success depends on having the public's confidence that we're ethical and that we're working on behalf of all Americans and not on behalf of ourselves, and we're not leaking and that kind of thing. So we do have a culture. When we're working on for example, a regulatory matter or some matter involving one of the banks, it never leaks out of the Fed. So I am proud of that record.
Okay, so if you go back in history, when inflation began to arise after COVID, at some point people said, including you, that it was transitory. In hindsight, what do you think people missed about the nature of the inflation? Why was it more enduring than people initially thought?
So this is a question that people will be writing papers about and debating longer after all of us are gone. And it's early to say. It's actually kind of soon to be answering it. But I think so. Here's my answer to that question. When inflation arrived in March of 2023, it was really coming out of the goods sector, and it was connected to really high demand for goods, and it was. The supply chains, global supply chains, which account for most manufactured goods, collapsed because of too much demand and because of COVID. And to us, that looked like a temporary, fleeting situation. We also lost several million people out of the labor force, so wages went way up as the economy really boomed when we reopened the economy. And we thought, we were getting vaccines were coming in, and we thought that would fix itself too. Kids would go back to school. We essentially overestimated how quickly the economy would return to normal. These things finally did happen in 2023, but they didn't happen in 2021 or 2. And what we meant by transitory was that it would go away fairly quickly without the need for our intervention. You don't want to intervene with interest rates if something's going to go away quickly without us intervening, because monetary policy, as I mentioned, works with long and variable lags. So the lure is you look through things like a temporary oil shock. So that was the mistake, was that it actually didn't reverse itself. The problems with the supply side didn't reverse themselves until 2023, when they really did, when we got a big burst of employment, and also the supply chains were fixed.
So in hindsight, now knowing everything you now know, would you have done anything differently? Would you have had less quantitative easing? Would you have changed interest rates differently? What would you have done differently now knowing everything we now know?
It's almost unfair. Hindsight's always 20/20, right? We remember what we were doing in real time. We went from a really nice economy in December of 2019 to a global partial shutdown of the economy. And we were contemplating, there was no thought that vaccines were around the corner. The economy's closing down. We were looking at severe and perhaps prolonged downside risks. Literally people thinking and doing work on, are we going to have another depression? Is it going to be the 1930s? So governments around the world, and in particular the United States government, really went to work to provide a lot of support to the economy. We did everything we could, including many things that were red lines that we'd never crossed. We crossed them to support the economy and support the financial system. And it was all done because we were managing severe downside risks, which did not materialize. We did not have a depression. And part of that is because of what we did. Then the economy reopens, and demand is very, very strong. And we saw a big burst of inflation everywhere, including in the United States. It was different in different places. But, so that's what happened. And, it's not, that's how I would answer that.
Okay, but so what you did, you're happy with what you did in hindsight, you would say?
In foresight, I think that the work that we did in 2020 in response to the pandemic will stand up very well in history. I think people will look at the things that we did, and essentially the financial system was grinding to a halt all around the world. We acted. We were the first central bank, and we were the most, supportive. And I think that work will hold together when historians are looking back on it in a long time. I think when you get to the inflation era, that becomes a different question, and people are going to be arguing about that for a long time.
As a result of the action we took, and the economy was thought to slow down a fair bit, and many people use the phrase hard landing to describe, hard landing is a euphemism for a recession, I guess. People thought in 2023 we might have a hard landing. People thought in 2024 we might have a hard landing. And none of these people were economists, professionally trained economists, but they seem to be wrong. So do you rely on these economists very much in the future when you're projecting whether you should listen to their views on where the economy is going, or how do you react to the fact that we haven't had a hard landing and disappointed all those economists?
So I'll just say that, as someone famously said, predictions are very difficult, especially about the future. Right. And also, I know a lot of economic forecasters, and forecasters are a humble lot with much to be humble about. It is extremely difficult. Every good forecaster will tell you that it's very, very hard to know what the economy is going to do. To give you a good example. In our Teal book, every FOMC cycle, there's a book that goes out, and there's a baseline forecast in that. And our forecasters are really the top people in the field. And they give you that baseline. They also give you a section in that book which shows 7 or 8 alternative scenarios, which they also regard as plausible. So it's always a probability thing like that. It's like we've identified this one thing. So last year was a big surprise, and it was a big upside surprise. So of course we welcome those. We'd be happy to have more of those. But it just was one of those things where where things turned out much better for a whole variety of reasons. I will say that on the hard landing question, I have always felt like that there was a pathway to getting inflation back down to our 2% goal on a sustainable basis without the kind of pain in the labor market, the kind of high unemployment that has been typical of tightening cycles and getting inflation down. And the reason why my colleagues and I thought that was that the labor market was so overheated that it could cool down quite a bit without having to. There still is apparently no slack in the labor market. The labor market does not have slack. Essentially, you're at equilibrium now. But look where inflation is. Inflation's at 2.5%. So this was in defiance of a lot of conventional wisdom, but we thought that was right. And that says that you have to be, one thing you learn is humility in forecasting. But so I wouldn't rule it out, but I would say that the kind of hard landing scenario is certainly not the most likely or a likely scenario.
So you have said you have a target of 2% inflation. You want to get it in sight of 2%. Do you have a similar target for unemployment? If unemployment went to 4%, are you saying, well, that's okay because we don't need to do anything because 4% is tolerable? Or do you have such a similar kind of target as you do with inflation?
So you can't reduce unemployment to a single number for a couple reasons. First of all, the natural rate of unemployment probably moves through the cycle and over time. Maximum employment is a function of many, many different variables. It doesn't reduce itself to a specific number that would be durable over time. So inflation has 2% inflation some years ago became the global standard that everyone aims for in one way or another.
Some people have suggested that the Fed's independence is not as good as people talk about it being, and that maybe we'd better have more White House coordination with the Fed. I'm sure you've heard about this.
I think that.
Any comments on that?
I'd be happy to comment on what independence, on the point of central bank independence. So I think a long time ago, people have learned that a central bank that's independent of political consideration does a better job getting inflation under control. And that is accepted wisdom in all advanced economies around the world. It's also a principle that has very, very strong and broad support where it really matters, which is in Congress. You know, you talk to senior leaders in both chambers, in both political parties, and they all understand that you want an independent central bank that doesn't run monetary policy to support or oppose any particular politician or political party.
Independence is one thing, but you still have some information sharing. So how do you coordinate or share information with the administration? Do you regularly meet with the Secretary of Treasury or White House staff people, or how do you communicate with them? So
there's a very standard set of relationships which doesn't change at all, administration to administration, and I could start anywhere, but Council of Economic Advisors is in the White House. We have lunch with them every month or so, although they get canceled sometimes because we're all busy. That's one thing. I have breakfast with the Secretary of the Treasury every week, unless she's traveling or I'm traveling. I have, since there was a National Economic Council, there's been a regular / sometimes irregular breakfast with the head of the NEC, and I do that too.
Do you ever get a call from the President of the United States saying interest rates are too high or something like that?
So, ever? No, I would say that, meetings with the President are rare and appropriately so.
Okay. So you were originally appointed to the board of the Fed by President Obama, yes, and you're appointed chair by President Trump and reappointed by President Biden, and your term as chair goes through, I think, May of 2026.
That's right.
So any thought about staying through all the way through May 2026? You're going to do that?
Yes.
Okay. And if some president came along and said, well, you did a great job, I'd like you to reappoint you, would you consider that?
I have nothing for you on that today.
Okay. All right. And is being chair of the Fed a enjoyable job or not so much?
It is, actually. I think I enjoy it. I enjoy it quite a bit. I do. First of all, it's a great honor. It's incredibly interesting. I love the people we work with. I love the institution. At this time in my life, it's just been a great thing. I'm in my 13th year there now, and it's been really challenging and all that. But what else would you want? I'm very happy doing the job.
So you're obviously in pretty good shape. How do you stay in shape? Do you walk a lot, or you ride bikes, or what do you do?
Yes, I do those things. I swim, I ride my bike, I go to the gym a lot. I try to stay fit, as you'll remember from our days together.
Right. So but when you were, let's say, riding a bike, do people, get out of the way, or do you have?
Nobody knows you with a bike helmet and goggles on. You're just another person on the road.
So I think you have said somewhere that when the Fed does lower interest rates, not saying that you're saying it's going to do that, but if the Fed does lower interest rates at some point, you didn't think it was ever going to go back to kind of the free money practically of years ago when interest rates were almost zero. Is that a fair statement, that you don't think it's a good idea to go back to interest rates as low as they once were?
The period between the global financial crisis and the pandemic was historically unusual from the standpoint that we had ever lower interest rates through that era, including part of the era when, for example, sovereign debt of major European sovereigns was trading at a significantly negative rate. And so that was quite unusual. And still, even with rates that low, inflation was very low, below target. So the question is what caused that, and are the forces that caused that gone for now? And I think most people attribute the low inflation era to slow-moving forces like demographics, globalization, technological evolution, things like that. And those may or may not have changed. But nonetheless, I look at where we are now. Our funds rate is 5.3%, roughly, give or take. And it feels like it's restrictive, but not severely restrictive. So it tells me that rates, at least for now, the neutral rate must have risen, probably has risen from where it was during the inter-crisis period. And I mean, I think instinctively, I can't prove this. We're going to learn about this empirically, but it seems to me that the neutral rate is probably higher than it was during the inter-crisis period, and so rates will be higher.
So the Federal Reserve, without saying you're going to lower interest rates at this point, if you did lower interest rates at some time, I thought you had said you didn't want to lower interest rates and then maybe say, well, maybe we made a mistake and we're going to increase them again. You want to have a policy that's fairly consistent for a while. In other words, lower interest rates but not bounce back and forth every FOMC meeting. Is that a fair summary?
That wouldn't be a great outcome, but we don't want to be too risk averse. I think we want to, we know that the economy is unpredictable, and the test we've set is we want to have greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably down to 2%, or alternatively, if we see unexpected weakening in the labor market, or some combination of those two. And when we see that, and the data really show that, and that's reflected in our confidence and our understanding, then it'll be time for us to move. And we won't worry. Of course, it wouldn't be great if you were moving up and down quite a bit. That wouldn't be ideal.
Some of your predecessors used to speak in what I call Fed speak, which is to say incomprehensible to the average person. You try to actually explain things. Is that because you're not an economist, or you just like to explain things better because you actually sort of explain what you're likely to do at the Fed and then you actually explain afterwards? Does that upset a lot of people at the Fed that you actually try to put it in English?
No, I don't think so. No, as you know, I enjoy communicating with people, and I didn't have a career as an academic economist. I'm not a trained economist, so I don't speak like one. And that seems to, I do hear a lot from, for example, people on Capitol Hill that they really appreciate that they can understand what I'm saying.
So today, the ECB lowered their interest rates recently. So why do you think the ECB lowered interest rates before the Federal Reserve? Did their economies weaker than ours, or what? Yeah,
so they're different. There are differences if you look around the world, and the big difference between the United States and many other nations is just that our economy has been so much stronger. Europe went through, the European Union went through significant Eurozone, a significant period of very, very low growth, while we were growing, 3% plus last year. So we're in a different place. And I mean, actually, what's more remarkable about the current situation is how much there is in common between what happened. Inflation broke out everywhere. Central banks did kind of very similar things. There's little differences in timing in terms of starting to loosen policy, but really the era, I think, will be known much more for its commonalities than it is for its differences like this.
So when the FOMC makes a decision, let's say to increase rates or lower rates, they finish their final meeting, you are authorized then to go out and explain what it is. How long before, after the meeting ends, before you go out and publicly explain it? Is it 20 minutes or so?
It's 3 or 4 hours usually.
3 or 4 hours?
Yes, because the meeting might end at, I'm out at 2:30 p.m. That's when the press conference starts at 2:30, so usually the meeting's over by 11.
And you don't worry that things will leak out in that interim period of time, I assume?
No, I don't.
Okay.
People know better than that, I think. And
so in some parts of the society these days, people are making decisions based on something called artificial intelligence, AI. Have you thought about, calling up ChatGPT and saying, here's all the data we have. What do you think about would be a good idea? Have you ever thought about that, or they're not going to likely do that?
We haven't done that. I mean, we have done little things like we've asked ChatGPT to generate questions for the press conference. Oh. And I'm happy to report for any journalists who are here that the questions were not as good as the ones we get from real journalists. So,
what about my questions? How do they compare to my questions? Okay, no comment. Right, so they weren't that great. Okay. So today, at the Federal Reserve Board, you are not involved in picking anybody who's on the Federal Reserve Board. The president makes those decisions. Do they ever call you for advice on who you might pick or they might pick?
It has happened, but it's, I would say, not the norm now. The Reserve Bank presidents are different. We play a role with the search committees from the Reserve Banks on that.
So every summer there's a meeting of the Federal Reserve people out in Jackson Hole. What do you all do out there? I mean, I always wonder, you wear cowboy boots, you go on ride horses. What do you all do? Why do you need to go to Jackson Hole? Why not go to, someplace closer than to Washington, D.C., Baltimore like?
Cowboy boots are worn by some, but not all. I don't wear them myself. But it's what it is. It's an academic conference. So the Kansas City Fed, which puts this on, they'll pick a topic, and then they'll find, really top economists to write papers about that topic, or more than one topic. You come to Jackson Hole, they present their paper, people critique it, they praise it, and that kind of thing, and that's the mornings. And in the afternoon, people go take a hike, and let me be clear, this is not a rate hike, it's an actual physical hike.
But you usually make a speech out there, I think,
yes.
every year.
Traditionally, not every. I've done this every year, but not every Fed chair has done it every year. But I give the opening speech, and it doesn't have to have anything to do with the topic of the conference. I just give a speech.
And is it carefully worked on by the staff? You make sure you say something that sounds interesting, but you don't make any news?
No, actually. So I try to do. Typically, what I do is I talk about it's really focused on the economic outlook and that kind of thing at any given point in time. At Jackson Hole, I've tried to take a step back or move to a higher level and try to say things that have a little more generality to them and see what can we learn, for example.
Now, the Federal Reserve is over 100 years old. It was created under Woodrow Wilson. If you were around then, what would you have suggested they do better than they did in creating the system? Or do you think the system works pretty well after 100 years and you wouldn't change it very much?
So I'm giving myself perfect hindsight here. I would do what Congress did in 1933. So the original Fed didn't have an FOMC, and it really didn't function very well during the early parts of the Depression or during other. So in 1933, the current structure was put in place, and that's with the FOMC, with the number of governors and the voting arrangements. And I think that arrangement is fine. It works really well. In the 70s, the dual mandate was added. But ultimately, we're not looking for any law change. We think we have the authorities that we need. We think that the law is in just a fine place.
Okay? So basically, you think the system works reasonably well
I do.
As it is today. And today, what is the biggest economic challenge you think facing the country? Is it growth? Is it inflation? Hard landing potentially? Or what are you most worried about? What keeps you up at night, if anything, in the economy?
So I'll say in the short term, that's what keeps me up. Like literally, the thing I'm thinking about in the middle of the night is always this balance we have between not wanting to, if we ease too early, we can undermine the progress on inflation. And if we wait too late, we can undermine economic activity. We can undermine the expansion. And, so we want to get this right. And getting it right is incredibly important for the people we serve. So that is really, that's what I spent a lot of my thinking time on. Longer term, there are lots of things to worry about, but that's really what keeps me up.
Most people, they have dinner with friends or sometimes. How can you have dinner with friends without hinting at what you're thinking about? And do you ever get suggestions from your friends at dinner, this is what you should do? And how do you respond when they kind of say, maybe you should lower interest rates? You just keep eating or what?
You might define the word friend to mean doesn't ask you about interest rates. So. No, people don't do that generally. People I don't know will always say, hey, cut rates. Somebody said that in the elevator this morning.
Did that influence you or no?
I said, thank you, sir. No, but I mean, people say things, but, it's fine.
Okay, so today, for somebody that would like to be the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board in the future, is it a job you would recommend to your best friend or your best enemy?
I think it's a great job. I think, again, the last thing Chairman Bernanke said to me as he was that day, I went to see him that day, his last day at the Fed, he said, you learn so much at the Fed. And remember, Ben Bernanke was a top 5 monetary economist in the world when he arrived at the Fed. So he learned a lot at the Fed. So can you imagine how much I've learned, starting? So it's never felt like work. It's so interesting all the time. And also, the dedication of the people who work there, and the staff, these are people who have chosen a life of not being in the public, spotlight. They just want to do their work and serve the public, and they're very dedicated. It's a wonderful place, and I would recommend the job.
So the Fed is also responsible for the way the Fed is set up. You're worried about a stable currency, I assume, and stable, well, not currency. You're worried about, I guess,
stable prices,
inflation.
Yeah.
And you're worried about unemployment, but you have no. You don't make any decisions about what the impact is going to be on the currency or the dollar. In other words, the impact of what you decide to do on the dollar is not something you're mandated to worry about. Is that right?
That's right. The administration has that portfolio, the management of the dollar, for what that is. It used to be something different than what it is now. But for us, the effects of the things that we do or don't do on the dollar are just another financial variable, like equity prices or things like that.
But do you worry, if you worry about inflation, as you obviously are, what about the debt the United States has? We have $35 trillion of outstanding in government indebtedness, and we're adding about $1.6 to $2 trillion more or less every year. Aren't you worried about that on the impact of the economy on inflation?
So I am very worried over time about the deficits that we're running. It's not the Fed's job. We don't give Congress advice, but let me just say that we're on an unsustainable path. That doesn't mean that the level of debt we have is unsustainable. It's not. But the path we're on, where we're running, large deficits at a time of full employment and healthy growth, is not a sustainable one over time. And we really need to get to work on that. I would hope this is a top-line issue for elected people whose job it is not our job. And I believe that if I do talk to quite a few elected officials in Congress, and I think there is a rising sense that it's time to do something about that, and it will take bipartisan action to address.
Let me ask you, in dealing with Congress, you testify, I think, at least twice a year before members of Congress. You do the House side and the Senate side. Have you ever suggested them having a joint committee so you don't have to say the same thing twice, or they don't like that?
This is in the law. It's twice in February and twice in July, so it's 4 times a year. This is the Humphrey Hawkins put that in, and it's a tradition. And so the Senate went first last week. The House went first in this March, so they alternate. I think it would take, I don't know what it would take.
Do you get a lot of questions from members that you think are really adding a lot of good advice to you, or?
I think the members ask excellent questions. Yes, thank you for asking. They do. I'm generally very much pleased.
But you spend a fair amount of time with members of Congress compared to some of your predecessors. Is that because you think that they add a lot of value, or you just think it's a good courtesy to do that?
I think it's part of our job. In our system of government, it is the legislature that has oversight over the Fed. It's not the executive branch. In a parliamentary system, they're sort of one and the same. So it's the 2 committees, and so I spend a great deal of time up on the Hill talking to people in both political parties, House and Senate, just finding out what's on their mind and really trying to take on board their thoughts on the economy and on what we're doing. And I think they appreciate that. And I think that to me is really a big part of this job.
The Fed depends on data, but how good is the Fed data collection efforts? In other words, are you using the same data collection methods you used 20, 30 years ago, or because of technology, you have better data collection methods than before? And are you convinced you have data that's as good as the private sector has?
Most of the data that we get is the same that everybody else gets. The unemployment data, the inflation data, not collected by the Fed. We do some data collection. And we've actually been, dabbling in big data efforts for more than a decade. So I think we're very focused on the quality of data and collecting different kinds of economic data. During the pandemic, of course, it became necessary to find all sorts of, different sorts of data to reflect what was going on in the economy. We did a lot of that too.
So when you became the chair of the Fed, what was the best advice somebody gave you who was a previous chair of the Fed?
What comes to mind, I can't think of one thing. I thought that what Chairman Greenspan said was get a set of earmuffs.
And when you eventually are not the chair of the Fed and if somebody succeeds you, what would be the advice you would give them about how to be a good chair of the Fed?
To me, I think it's a very special American institution. And it's one that works to serve all Americans. And absolutely critical to that is staying in our lane, sticking to our knitting, not, running to reach out to the big, hot political issues of the day. And I think that's critical because once you do that, if that's going to be what you do, what's the case for your independence? You know, Congress has given us these powers. They've left us alone to do it. And really, we need to do those things and resist the temptation to expand that mandate. That's what I probably will say to my successor.
And when you want to go out to, let's have a dinner in a restaurant, you worry that people are listening to what you're saying, they're eavesdropping, or you don't say anything that anybody has to make you worry about?
So that is exactly what I worry about. I have found that I get recognized now, and people at the next table are always listening. So we don't really go to restaurants.
So what do? You just go in a private room, or you don't go to restaurants?
If you're at a restaurant, you need to be in a private room because, of course, the people and if, by the way, if someone at your table were to be well served and start to speak loudly, everyone's hearing that too. So you got to be. We just don't do that for now. We go to we eat at home a lot. We eat at friends' houses.
Okay. Well, your wife is here. Where is she? She's right there. How long have you been married now?
15. 39 years.
39. You had to add that up.
Do the arithmetic, yeah.
39 years. And you have how many children?
3 children.
And any grandchildren?
We have 3 grandchildren, 3 little boys, the oldest of whom is 3, and all in the same family. So this is going to be quite a little place to visit.
Okay. Well, look, we've known each other a long time. I congratulate you on doing a great job at the Fed and avoiding the hard landing. And thanks for earlier telling me when you're going to lower interest rates in our private meeting. I now know when interest rates are going to go down. No, actually, that's not true.
You said you wouldn't tell anyone.
Right. Okay. Of course. Jay, thanks for a great job you're doing for the country.
Thank you, David.
That Fed Chair Jerome Powell sitting down with our very own David Rubenstein at the Economic Club of Washington. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. We are broadcasting to you live from the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. I'm Kaylee Lines alongside Joe Matthew. Where, Joe, we are expecting to hear a great deal of policy at the RNC this week, including on economic policy. Yep. And interesting to hear from Chairman Powell about not just the nature of where interest rates are going and how confident he is in the inflation data we're seeing, but also speaking of things like the deficit and the independence of the Fed.
The independence of the Fed and I guess the non-political nature of the Fed.
Yes.
So many questions about whether September is in play here. Kaylee, pretty interesting conversation in a way that only David Rubenstein could bring to us. And I will note here, as we take a look at the markets, Kaylee, the theme of this first day of the Republican National Convention is the economy. Mm-hmm. And that is what we're going to be hearing lawmakers and other dignitaries speaking to later on today.
Yeah, and of course, as you mentioned, checking out the markets here, the S&P 500 up about 0.4% off on the day. We're off session highs, but still we're looking at records here. We're up about the same amount on the NASDAQ 100 and the Dow. Interesting to see the bond market not reacting too much, though. If you look at that sensitive 2-year yield to Fed policy, we were actually down on the day by a couple of basis points. Now we're exactly even. The 2-year at 4.45 at the moment. The 10-year yield is up by about 5 basis points. We're looking at about 4.23 there. Of course, when you're the chairman of the Federal Reserve, what you are often trying to do is make sure that you do not move the markets and break any news. But let's see if we did get any new information from the Fed chairman and bring in Bloomberg's Michael McKee, our international economics and policy correspondent. So, Mike, we did hear from Powell there talking about the idea that, yes, there was more confidence given to the Fed by the second quarter inflation data, if not the first. What does that mean as we look ahead to September?
Well, it doesn't mean a whole lot right now, but it does suggest that the Fed's getting closer to a rate cut. Powell seemed relatively confident about the progress that they have made. He noted that the last 3 inflation readings, including the most recent CPI, have been encouraging, but he didn't want to go as far as saying this gives us the confidence we need to cut. And then he went on to say, I'm not going to give any hints about policy at future meetings today. So basically, he's leaving his options open, but it does kind of take July off the table in the sense that the Fed doesn't like to surprise markets. So the idea that he would, at this point, cut rates without already starting to hint at it, he didn't do that. So it probably means they're not going to do something in July. What's interesting, though, and you can see it there, is the measure of September rate cut, which had been priced in earlier today, is now priced out slightly at 96 basis points. It would be 100 basis points for one cut. So markets are taking a sort of pessimistic view of this in general, although I guess some areas of the stock market are starting to price in the idea of a rate cut.
Well, it's interesting, Michael, the headline, "We don't put political filters on our decisions." Wasn't that the chairman's way of saying that September is in play?
Yeah, it's a way of saying September is in play. It's the same answer that he and every other member of the Open Market Committee give when asked, because a lot of people are looking at the calendar saying September 18th is pretty close to Election Day. There's no other meeting before Election Day, so they could cut rates then, which might be seen as an effort to help the incumbent. And the Fed has always argued that they don't do that, and history has shown that they don't let politics interfere. I think more important to the Fed is the idea that there are members of the party that is meeting in Milwaukee who have suggested changes to the Fed's mandates, and they are concerned about that. They don't want anybody to open up the Federal Reserve Act because all sorts of bad things could happen in terms of Fed independence.
Well, and that is kind of what we heard from the chairman at the end there, Mike. He talked about Fed independence and the idea that if he were to give advice to his successor, that they should not risk the temptation around expanding the mandate, which, of course, right now is just maximum employment and a 2% inflation target. As we think about the balance between those two sides of the mandate, though, hearing the chairman talking about the labor market there, is it now more really about the jobs picture than about the inflation picture, given where inflation levels have been able to come down to, even though we're not yet at 2%?
Well, it is to the extent that we see inflation continue to move down. Of course, any upward surprise would change the calculation. But right now, they are keeping an eye on the unemployment rate because it has risen. We're at 4.1%, which is where they thought we'd be at the end of the year. So if it goes significantly higher, that might pull forward a rate cut, make September definite, make July a possibility. We'll get the first week of August, the July unemployment figures. So that's something to keep an eye on. But his view was today, as it has been all this month in his various appearances, that unemployment and inflation are pretty much in balance now. They're positioned to move either way, depending on which one moves. But it's no longer that the unemployment rate is too low and that we have a very tight labor market that's pushing up inflation. So that's an encouraging sign for investors.
Michael, it's great to have you with us here at Bloomberg's Michael McKee on a special edition of Balance of Power live from Milwaukee. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons as we keep our eyes on Fiserv Forum, where day one of the RNC is happening just a couple of blocks from where we're sitting here at Bloomberg TV and radio in the field, and we assemble our political panel at this important moment. Rick Davis is with us right now, Stonecourt Capital partner alongside Jeanne Zaino, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. It's great to have both of you with us here. We're waiting on an announcement for a running mate. And the clock is ticking here. Rick, what's happening behind closed doors right now? Because obviously Donald Trump knows who this is. What is the campaign doing to prepare this unveiling?
Yeah, right now, part of what's happening is that the would-be vice president is meeting his team. There's a whole staff that's been built to take him or her from this venue onto a next 3 months of campaigning. And so it's not without its resources and whatnot. And then there's this last minute going through the speeches and making sure they're fine-tuned. They're going to be spending a little bit of time when the delegates aren't in the hall to go and do their walkthroughs, to see the stage for the first time. It's probably one of the things Donald Trump will do today, maybe right now. And so there's like administrative things. But by and large, there isn't much politics being done other than, the speeches. But they're also designing these moments, right? The thing you remember from the conventions are one or two emotional moments, when the president walks in and sees the crowd for the first time, or the president and first lady, or the candidate and his spouse, have some kind of gesture or something that's said at the stage. So that's what the organizers of this convention are trying to do, is figure out what's our moment going to be tonight. And of course, if Donald Trump shows up, that's a ready-made moment.
Well, absolutely. And it does seem that the integrity of the moment with which we all find out who the vice presidential pick actually is, to this point, has been preserved. It hasn't leaked out. We're all still laying in wait. And Rick, earlier in the program, you were bringing up the idea that it could be someone like Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, even though we don't understand him to be on the short list at this time. We're looking at instead Burgum, Rubio, J.D. Vance. And I wonder about the state of Virginia, Jeanne, as we just got new New York Times Siena polling today. Looks just at two states, Pennsylvania, Biden's home state, and where the shooting happened this weekend, and Virginia. And we should advise our listeners and viewers this poll did happen prior to the shooting, so we have to have that caveat in there. But it shows Trump leading in Pennsylvania. And in Virginia, Biden is only ahead by 3 points, 48 to 45, within the margin of error. So would someone like Glenn Youngkin be a smart pick for Trump? Could he actually turn Virginia red again?
He could. I mean, it is fascinating. I was just looking at this poll. I mean, the idea that Joe Biden is losing at this point, according to this poll, we have to say Pennsylvania, his home state, and then next door, nearby, Virginia, which Democrats, of course, it is really, I think, in my mind, a must win for Democrats. So should that go red, that is a huge problem for the Democrats. And so that does make Glenn Youngkin an attractive, appealing vice presidential candidate. I'm also curious, does the shooting over the weekend change Donald Trump's mind? I mean, all things being equal, if that had never happened, perhaps he had made his choice and stuck with it. But do you move away from somebody like J.D. Vance with a much tougher rhetoric to somebody like a Glenn Youngkin or a Doug Burgum, who have this sort of less rhetorical, strong statements that they've made that may be off-putting to moderates? I also note that they have now added Nikki Haley to the lineup to speak this week. Not that she's in the running to be VP as far as we know, but that's another interesting turn. So he does keep us waiting and watching and wondering. And I think when he gets in there, whether it's tonight or later this week, it is going to be one of those moments that Rick was just talking about that we all remember, especially given the fact the entire nation is rooting for him health-wise, considering what he has just survived.
Donald Trump did an interview with the Washington Examiner in which he said he rewrote his speech. It was going to be a humdinger, he said. Rick, honestly, it's going to be a whole different speech now. It's a chance to bring the country together. I was given that chance. I don't know if you believe the words you're hearing, but he has a moment, a delicate opportunity here to seize on. How different do you think that speech will be than it might have been on Friday?
Oh, I'm suspecting it's probably substantially different. I think you can't imagine what impact just escaping death has on Donald Trump or on anybody else. You can try to put yourself in that mind frame. But certainly the organizers of the campaign, the managers and the speechwriters and the folks who are charged with getting the most bump out of this convention as they can, they haven't missed that point. And the last thing they want is a divisive political speech where Donald Trump goes up to the podium and eviscerates Joe Biden. And so no doubt everyone's aligned on this. Donald Trump probably feels this way. The campaign's going to want to see something different. And so it's not just Donald Trump's speech. Whoever has been crafting the vice president's speech is going to be having to echo that. It may change the lineup of who introduces the vice presidential candidate. Currently, we had Donald Trump Jr., another pit bull of the Republican Party. I wouldn't be surprised to see a change made there. So I think you're going to see a kinder, gentler Republican convention moving out. No, nonetheless political, but definitely tonally different.
Well, and what goes for Republicans also probably goes for Joe Biden as his campaign, at least in rethinking your tone and the way in which you message, be it a threat to democracy or anything else. And I would point out that while we await to hear Donald Trump speak at the convention later this week, we will hear more from Joe Biden this evening as he sits down for an interview on NBC with Lester Holt after hearing from him 3 times within the last several days since the shooting, including an Oval Office address last night where he was talking about unity. Jeanne, knowing that there is going to be this split screen of the RNC and a vice presidential pick up against this interview, what is the winning message here for Joe Biden. What's he trying to do?
I thought his statement yesterday or last night was very strong. I think we're going to hear more of that. He's going to talk about uniting the country, the idea that we don't resolve our differences with guns or with violence. We do it at the ballot box. And I think it's very important that he called and spoke to Donald Trump. We have already noticed on the Republican side some modulating of rhetoric. People like Vivek Ramaswamy, who is a bit of a pit bull like Donald Trump Jr. and J.D. Vance, his tone seems to have moderated. So I don't know if we are just being Pollyannish and hopeful that the tone is moderating. We are, after all, going into a Republican convention, and any convention is about, opposition to your opponents politically. But it does seem like there is a change. And I will just say I've noticed in Donald Trump's rhetoric in particular, this talk about a conversion, the idea that this had that impact that Rick was just talking about, and that Ronald Reagan talked about after he was shot. It changed his life and what he hoped to do and did as president. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen with Donald Trump, but that some of that and that really fascinating interview in the Washington Examiner with Selena Zito, that was fascinating. And the fact that he called her was in and of itself really a remarkable moment.
Yeah, she was at the event.
She was there with her daughter.
And I guess they had an interview set up. He felt bad that they didn't have the opportunity. It is pretty remarkable here. Does Joe Biden need to make news tonight? Or is this simply about normalizing, as Jeanne indicated, the idea of doing interviews like these?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of inappropriateness by the president sort of, horning in on the first night of the Republican convention. In years gone by, there's sort of an understanding that you sort of give the opposition party their convention. So I think, I would be shocked if he tried to make news. I buy what Jeannie's saying, that he's just trying to remain relevant. Remember, it was only a couple of days ago we were talking about getting, the Democratic Party purging him from their ticket.
Right.
And so I think he's trying to manage the transition back to being a favorite of the Democrats. And I think certainly the White House and his campaign feel they need to have him out there showing people that he's vibrant and can handle the difficulties of a presidential campaign and the presidency. So I think that's what tonight's all about.
All right, Rick Davis of Stonecourt Capital and Jeanne Zaino of Iona University, Bloomberg Politics contributors in our political panel here in Milwaukee. Thank you so much. And still ahead, we'll be joined by former Homeland Security official Ashley Davis amid the heightened security here at the RNC in the aftermath of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump over the weekend. We'll have more next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is a special Balance of Power live from the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee on Bloomberg TV and radio. Welcome back. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew, where the news flow has been incessant as we await a vice presidential selection from Donald Trump and continue to assess the aftermath of the attempted assassination of the former president over the weekend. We also got more news in legal land. It's news that maybe favors Donald Trump as well, as the documents case in Florida, Judge Aileen Cannon presiding over it, has now been thrown out by that judge on the grounds that the appointment of Jack Smith, the special counsel who brought the case, was appointed unconstitutionally. So let's go now to Bloomberg's Sara Forden, who leads our legal coverage out of Washington. Sara, how unexpected was this, knowing that, yes, Aileen Cannon had been criticized for slow walking this case? We knew it probably wasn't going to go to trial before the election, but to throw it out entirely, was this expected?
Well, she had been briefing on this topic. She had held hearings, and then she got fundamental support from the opinion just 2 weeks ago in the Supreme Court decision on immunity, where Justice Clarence Thomas specifically raised this question of the constitutionality of the special counsel. And her opinion cites his opinion. So that is kind of the connection here. The ruling today did come as quite a surprise, however.
Sara, it's Joe. It's great to have you with us here as we join you from Milwaukee today. Let's cut to the chase then. Now that we've had this happen today, there will be no other trials for Donald Trump after New York, right?
We are not seeing any trials on the horizon, at least not before November. This ruling does also raise a question for the January 6th case and whether that will become an issue in that case. But first, more likely, this whole question of the constitutionality of the special counsel is likely to head back to the Supreme Court, where at this point only Justice Clarence Thomas has raised this issue, but certainly there are other conservatives on the court who may well agree with him.
Well, and it's important, Sara, to consider here, and we were discussing this with a member of the House Judiciary Committee, Congresswoman Victoria Spartz, earlier on the program. The suggestion that a special counsel's appointment may have not been in keeping with the constitutional duties of Congress to have some kind of role. Would that then throw into question, say, the special counsel that brought the case against the president, current president's son, Hunter Biden, David Weiss? Would it call into question special counsel Hur, who was investigating Biden's own handling of classified documents? Just how far could this extend?
So we're taking a look at all the other challenges to special counsels, and the famous, special counsels have been used throughout American history to review some of our most controversial situations. But in the case of David Weiss, the Hunter Biden special counsel, he was actually a U.S. attorney who had been approved and confirmed by the Senate. So under her reasoning, he would be okay to continue his work. Her point was that Jack Smith was a private citizen. There's no basis for a private citizen to be kind of lobbed into a prosecutorial role unless Congress has explicitly either confirmed that person or passes a law saying that this is an acceptable role for a private citizen.
Mm-hmm. So, Sara, what's the next important stop on the road here in Donald Trump's legal journey? Is it sentencing in New York in September?
Well, first of all, we are expecting Jack Smith to appeal this particular ruling. So there will very likely be more action in the Florida classified documents case. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a question over whether they are going to try to get Cannon removed from the case and start over. So, of course, all of that would take a lot of time. The next step in the hush money case in New York is for the District Attorney Bragg to respond to the immunity question there. We are expecting Judge Merchan to hold hearings on that, so it's likely the sentencing could even be postponed longer.
With us live from Washington, Sara, thank you. Bloomberg's Sara Forden here on Balance of Power. As we turn our attention back to the Republican National Convention here in Milwaukee, I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons with the calm before the convention. Joining us now, Ashley Davis, former Homeland Security official and former White House official in the Bush 43 administration. Ashley, it's great to see you in Milwaukee. Thank you for joining us here at the table. I'm sure you're very busy throughout this week. We remind our viewers and listeners that you were the second person in the door at the brand new Department of Homeland Security. Of course, in the wake of 9/11, which was a game changer for security, what happened on Saturday, the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, will be a game changer again?
I think so. I mean, actually, so I don't insult any of my former colleagues, I was actually employee number 1 at the White House Office of Homeland Security after 9/11. Most forget that the department wasn't created until 2003, which is very important these days because when the department was created is when they put in place the National Special Security Events, which is what the convention is. Both conventions are right now. So there's $75 million that have been given both the Republican convention and the Democrat convention for the Secret Service to take the lead with other security agencies to make sure that this facility, as well as Chicago, will be very safe. I think the problem right now is the fact that do we have any confidence in the Secret Service? And so I think that's my question. But I would think
that you have to ask that openly is terrifying.
Absolutely. I mean, what happened Saturday, first of all, it's where I grew up. So I know the area very, very well. The fact that there's very limited, and I'm sure you've heard this many times, and so is your viewers, there's very limited buildings there. So the fact that there was, a football field and a half, that this person is really what it is, away from the president. And this morning I saw that the Secret Service is still blaming local law enforcement, which to me, we have to remember the Secret Service are the people that actually put the perimeter in place And two, they cannot say that this is the local law enforcement's fault. It is a major security breach that stops at the top of the Secret Service.
Well, it also raises the question as to when that breach should have potentially been intercepted. If it really was physically at the location, that individual shouldn't have been able to access the roof with a semi-automatic rifle, or is it a failure in intelligence gathering before that? The idea that there could have been this threat out there against Donald Trump that wasn't accurately assessed. I guess just where in the process is the flaw?
I think it's actually, I think that planning, number one, that there wasn't someone on that building when it was that close. There should be, and usually just in my former life doing so many events with presidential events, you have people on all those buildings. So the fact that someone was not on that building and then took time to climb up the building, I think that it started beforehand in planning of not having someone there, to answer your question. But I also think the fact that they left that amount of time to have during the actual event is where it really broke down. But I think it's a long process. And going back to your other question about the intelligence before the event, there is so much intelligence happening always, but especially now in this divisive world that we live in, that there are so many threats against both of these candidates that
hard to sort through the noise.
Exactly, but still, that's why you put these people on top of these buildings so it wouldn't happen. And the other thing that was just crazy to me, and a bunch of former Secret Service people were saying it today as well, is the fact that they let him. It's an iconic photo. What happened of him standing up, and that's amazing. But there could have been 3 shooters, even though the one was dead at that point.
So that in itself was a failure.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is going to be I can't imagine what's going to happen with the investigative people at the Department of Homeland Security, Inspector General, that will do a report on this and see what happened. I mean, it's a major failure.
Is it time to rethink this entire apparatus? Kayleigh mentions we spent time with Congresswoman Spartz earlier, and I asked her if it's time to renew this debate over whether members of Congress should have security details. I don't know if that would be part of the Secret Service or part of the Capitol Police. I know it would come at extreme cost, but to your point, the threats continue to increase.
Absolutely, and if you talk to any members of Congress, they're really nervous right now.
Can we afford to do that, or can we afford not to do that?
Look what we spend money on, so I would think that we definitely can afford if it's a priority. I don't think that you would probably do Secret Service. I mean, obviously, there's Capitol Police that do the Speaker of the House and the Majority Minority Leader in the Senate. So I think there's still different levels of security with the Secretary of State is actually security through the Secretary of State. The Treasury Secretary is through that. It's not all Secret Service. So you may be able to do different. Private security, I mean, if I was a member of Congress right now with a high enough profile, I would be outsourcing my own security through my campaign money.
Well, think of Senator Mitt Romney, who has had to fund his own security for him and his family. This is a very real thing. So as we consider the security of ourselves right now, as we are in Milwaukee for the Republican convention, we all have had to contend with, I'm sure at this point, the perimeter, and maybe have had some items confiscated in the case of my aluminum water bottle, even though it was empty.
Oh, I didn't know about
So for anyone who's entering the perimeter here in Milwaukee, don't bring your water bottles. But the point is, we're here for the Republican convention, which in many ways is likely to change in tone this week as a result of what happened. But there are some things that still need to happen, including the selection of the vice president. We're expecting it's going to come at some point today. Donald Trump has said as much. How did the events of the last 48 hours change your thinking about who it's likely to be?
With his tone of unity, and obviously President Biden's as well, but former President Trump's unity message, I would think that if Senator Vance was going to be the nominee, that you may rethink that because of he's kind of a flamethrower in regards to some of the things he said, especially after what he said on Saturday. From what we all understand, we're going to hear this afternoon, late afternoon, about the vice presidential candidate. I personally think if you have someone like Governor Burgum or Governor Youngkin from Virginia, that they are probably someone that are more middle of the road in regards to how they talk about different things and would be a safer bet, in my opinion. And I really don't think that he did know who it was going to be until recently, and I definitely think that this would change his perception.
Reuters is now reporting that Marco Rubio has been informed that he is not going to be Donald Trump's vice president. So now we're going to go through this process of elimination all day. It would be classic Trump for this to be no one from the short list.
Totally.
Right? That he had us off the scent the whole time.
Which is why there is a kind of a swelling of information about Governor Youngkin. And then you still have people that are thinking, well, was it going to be Nikki? And I do think that there is a possibility that it's somebody.
Nikki Haley?
Would you say?
Are you allowing for that?
I would love it to be Nikki, as you know.
Yeah.
But I'm also a huge Doug Burgum fan, so, but I do agree with you. I mean, this is kind of his thing, to make it nobody that he's talking about. But that's interesting about Rubio. A lot of people were hoping that as well.
But he doesn't have to move now.
Well, that was the question. They're both Florida men. So how do you get around that? Marco Rubio may have had to change his residency to another state. Again, this is just Reuters reporting it. Bloomberg has not independently confirmed it, but it does feel kind of, if not The Apprentice, like the weakest link, like just a one-by-one elimination.
Exactly.
Right?
The other thing that's interesting is there was a huge Twitter blow up today that J.D. Vance left his house in a motorcade, but it's been confirmed that that was secret. That was not Secret Service, but VP motorcade. That was from the governor of Ohio. Gave J.D. Vance some protection, which he probably needs.
So what are your broader thoughts then as we get into day one here, the change in tone that we've already talked about, Donald Trump rewriting the speech? Is this going to feel or look different tonight than you expected?
Absolutely. I mean, even him going back to reaching out to Nikki yesterday, or on Sunday, yesterday, I guess, and asking her to speak. I do think that there is a unity conversation. If you did see, there was going to be a floor fight, so to speak, about the abortion issue and the platform, that how they changed the platform to say that they're going to let this up to the states, which obviously angered a lot of pro-life people, that they did cancel that floor fight. I do think that there's a lot of things that will not be happening in regards to kind of the contentious issues. His tone, also, the campaign has been calling the speakers. Tim Scott speaking this evening, I just heard. So he's probably not the VP candidate, I would think.
There you go.
But that they've asked all the speakers to not be talking about Saturday in regards to
that is
fueling the
fascinating.
fire. Yeah.
We'll leave that, I guess, to the former president on Thursday.
Exactly. So, and I think someone said it really well today. When you were this close, like literally, from dying and getting hit with a bullet, maybe it's really has changed.
A reminder of everyone's mortality.
Absolutely.
Ashley Davis, former Homeland Security official and also a hometown girl from the Pennsylvania town in which all of this went down yesterday. Great to have you with us here in Milwaukee. And of course, Joe, we aren't done yet. We still have a vice president, well, at least to find out who the pick is, and more coverage coming up later today.
It's only day one. We've barely begun, and we will have a lot more for you later today on Bloomberg. See you back here at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on the late edition of Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew, live from Milwaukee on Bloomberg TV and radio.